Well, good morning and welcome, Chief Constable and your team and all those joining the session online or in person. I'm standing in for the chair today. We have your report, Chief Constable, and my remarks will be brief as we have a lot of questions for you, as you'd expect. This is our first full board meeting since the horrendous attack on John Caldwell. And on behalf of the board, please know that our thoughts remain with John, his wife and his son, and the family at this time. We have kept a close watch on the investigation and thank all those on the team for their work to date. We reiterate the call for any information that will bring those responsible to justice, and that information can be offered anonymously through Crime Stoppers, who have offered a reward of $20,000. We'd like to thank all those who have expressed support for John and his family and who have voiced support and assistance for policing. It is important for the wider policing family to know that support is there now and as we go forward. Chief Constable, we are fast approaching the financial year end and entering into a year of serious budgetary pressures. We have made representation around the necessity to improve the monies available for policing. We know that the representations were well received and you have the full backing of all board members on this. And we can assure you of our continuing support for yourself and the team as we go forward. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Chief Constable, and invite you to address the meeting.
Thank you. I'm going to keep my comments brief too this morning. Obviously, the report is here. It is a significant meeting after the awful attack on John last week, as you say, Chair. But I think I want to begin by thanking board members, political members, and the public for the overwhelming support that we've all received. Those messages have been put back to John's immediate family following this awful attack. You will appreciate as well from your own comments just how hard the team that Mark is leading have been working since last week to bring the offenders to justice. We've made numerous arrests now, as you see in the public domain, and I've been out myself 3 times to Irma for various reasons to see firsthand what is going on and see John's family, to give them every support. And it's been quite tremendous, the effort that's gone into the determination to catch the people that have done this, both from those investigators that are dealing with the immediate aftermath, the crime scene investigators that help us piece together the evidence bit by bit, and also the determination of colleagues from across the country, many of whom who knew John, to do their bit. So we are pushing ahead as quickly as we can. I know there's been continued attention and concern about John's condition, and we've again had messages from all over the world, in actual fact, sort of extending people's thoughts to us and his family at this difficult time. He remains critically in a hospital, but he's in good care, and we're ensuring that his wife and son have every possible support from the organisation at the moment. We've had a number of constructive meetings, probably echoing some of your sentiments in terms of explaining the security situation, and not just the immediate aftermath, but the medium-term consequences. So that I think it's been important to reflect what this means for policing, but also wider society at the moment. And again, through those briefings, some of the most senior politicians in the country have also expressed their concern and also have been really, really personable in their approach to John's family. It's all too easy to forget that a lot is also going on in the wider politics at the moment, and there have been some questions raised in the margins about the sort of the revision to the protocol arrangements and the effect on loyalism. And I think it may come up today, but it's also worth saying sort of early on, at the moment, in the midst of everything else, we assess that loyalism remains calm in terms of the chatter, but we'll keep that sort of perspective under careful review. I think it will come up a number of times today, but we are really concerned about the budgetary situation we face, that you only have to look into the eyes of tired officers and staff that have been dealing with this investigation to realise the strain it has put into the organisation, But as things stand at the moment, we are still due to lose over 300 more police officers and further police staff next year. So at some point, these questions have to be addressed if we're to continue with the pace and the resilience that we currently enjoy. I think it's interesting as well to remember that despite the events that have clearly sent shockwaves across the country and indeed into the organisation, that policing still carries on. And I thought it's about paying tribute to the people that work for us, that they carried on with that determination, resilience over and above all the other things that are going on. And a small sort of sense of what's been dealt with, over 3,999 calls, over 350 arrests and nearly 1,500 crimes have still sort of gone through the police service as well as dealing with all this. So we continue to respond promptly to calls for assistance from the public and indeed give service to victims. A bit like last month's theme, we will come back with more formality, but in the midst of all this as well, we've received very constructive verbal feedback from the inspection, from Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, about how we treat victims and the quality of our investigations. Now, clearly, as we said last time, that's subject to final moderation, etc. elsewhere. So we won't sort of say too much yet, but alongside the feedback we gave you last month, some pretty constructive feedback on a number of fronts about how we're both protecting the public and dealing with a range of issues internally. I think the thing to probably join you on is still the sort of rally call that despite the progress we've made in the investigation, the budgetary position means that we need to do all we can together to make sure that the people that we rely on to deliver policing really have the tools to do the job well. And I think that's one of the big issues for today, Chair. Finally, obviously, the board itself is in transition, and I'd just like to, on behalf of all of us, put on record our appreciation to Carmel and to Michael for their work at the board over the last few years and their support to us and sort of helping us remember some of the detail and hold us to account, but also the collective endeavour, and wish them well in their future. So thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Well, Michael has a couple of questions for us, but before we go to him, I want to invite Gerry Kelly, if I can find it. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable. You've already dealt with the first question I was going to ask you, was actually about John Caldwell himself and how he's doing, and there'll be, I think, thousands of people thinking about him and praying for him, so I hope he makes a quick recovery. The second issue was that there's been some reports about people have been arrested from, if you want, the nationalist, Republicans part of our community, and also the unionist and loyalist. There's been a bit confusion in terms of that. Could you give what you can in public an update on the investigation?
Yeah. So thanks. First of all, thanks again for echoing the comments and concern about John's condition. We obviously, through Mark and the team, are in touch daily in terms of how that is, but we know he's receiving top-class care in hospital. But Mark, do you want to pick up on that one?
Thank you, Chief. Yeah, so we know there are, I suppose there's some speculation about the motivation behind the shooting incident because of the community background of some of the people who have been arrested. The individuals who people are speculating about are involved in criminality. They have quite strong and long associations with violent dissident Republicans, namely the New IRA, members of the New IRA. We are very clear that this is still assessed as being an attack carried out by the New IRA, and that's where the primary focus of the investigation is at this point. And it is not related to some of the other speculation that we've seen today.
Very good. I appreciate that. Are they, I mean, you've said it's connected to the so-called New IRA. In terms of the other arrests, and I know you're limited in terms of this, is there believed to be a loyalist connection to this investigation? Because I think there's something like 4 arrested.
So we shouldn't get confused with titles like loyalism. So these are people who are involved in criminality. They have strong links to members of the New IRA. Those are long-standing links. They've been arrested because we suspected they have been involved in this, and we still assess that this has been an attack carried out by the New IRA, who have very explicitly stated that they wish to carry out attacks on police officers. and John has been the target on this occasion.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gerry. Michael, your first question is around budgetary issues in respect of terrorism.
Okay, Chair. Chief Constable, thanks very much for your update and report and your update on the events of last week. You're more than aware, I'm sure, the board's had comprehensive assessments of the impact of the budgetary pressures into the next and the subsequent financial years at the February 2023 resources meeting just last week. The question I want to ask you is, has the PSNI been able to make any assessment of what proportion of the overall PSNI budget is actually focused on combating the terrorist threat? And based on your response to that, is that proportion likely to change as a result of the squeeze on the budget at this stage?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Well, obviously, we've got the here and now. Then we've got to assess, do we get any financial support either from UK government or locally when a budget is set here in a few weeks, which could affect some of those dynamics. But Mark's been doing quite a lot of work to assess the broad reach, as has Pamela, so I'll probably ask both to give a perspective both operationally and financially.
Yeah, so I suppose the first thing to say is over recent years, the budget's become so complicated between main grant, district security funding, PCTF funding, EU exit funding. So there's so many layers now to the budget. In earlier times, we worked on a figure of 30% of the main grant being consumed by the threat level context that we place in Northern Ireland. And that tries to absorb things like training, some of the equipment, and an awful lot of the opportunity costs that policing here has to engage in that it wouldn't engage in other parts of the UK or Ireland if it wasn't facing a threat against our officers. And this would include, for example, the minimum numbers that we have on duty, the minimum numbers we would have on police cars and so forth, which is dictated not just by the numbers of calls that we go to in the crime we have to deal with, but also by the threat that the officers may have to face when going to calls. So the actual cost of policing the residual terrorist threat in Northern Ireland is wrapped into all of the budgets. Clearly, the District Security Fund, which runs toward about 60 million a year, 30 million roughly of which is now main granted anyway, and 30 million of which is Treasury. So that's in the budget as well. It is meant to be used for the front end of this, but it doesn't cover all the costs, for example, for intelligence branch, by any means. It won't cover all the costs for our investigation teams. It won't cover all the costs for search activity and so forth by our operations support department. And it won't cover, say, all the costs that district commanders will face. It won't cover all the costs, for example, for the continuing provision of firearms training to every member of the service for their purpose protection weapon, which relates to the threat. So 30% was the old figure. We haven't got a revised figure, Michael. We are in very detailed conversations as a team as late as this morning about the budget. And maybe Pamela, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, sorry, wrong colour, it's red. No, I don't think of an awful lot more to add to that. I mean, I think our challenge at the moment is that whilst there's specific ring fence funding for the additional security funding element of it, as Mark referenced from the Treasury, just over £30 million, so much of the base element of that is incorporated within our normal main grant operational delivery. And whilst there's excessive pressure, we've reported to the board our understanding of a gap on our baseline of £106 million. But again, additional modelling being done that could increase to 170, 200 million. Is that as the pressure is on the main grant, irrespective of what is in the ASF, that brings overall pressure in our ability to respond to dealing with both the local police issues and indeed the issues that we've spoken about currently. So it is a huge challenge for us, Michael, for sure.
Thanks. There are three supplementaries around this area, and Mark, first of all.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Chief Constable and the team. With the appalling attack on DCI John Caldwell, and I suppose share the sentiment of others in terms of our wishing him, his family and his colleagues well, but there's a heightened need to keep officers and staff safe. In addition, the PSNI need to be resourced to carry out their full functions and uphold the rule of law, which those who carried out that attack in Omagh and those threatening to burn this place down want to undermine. I was just wondering, over the last 2 weeks, does the PSNI have any sense at all that the NIO and the London Exchequer are any more willing to address the grave financial situation that the police service here are facing, including the 100 or 106 or more million funding gap at the start of the next financial year, which is only a matter of weeks away?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Firstly, as I said to Gerry, thank you for the comments of support. But I think there's two parts to the answer, to be quite candid. Certainly, particularly between the three of us in different settings, we have had the opportunities to speak to both the Permanent Secretary in the Department of Justice and his officials, but also between us to senior members of the UK government and officials in the Northern Ireland office. So we are presenting our case as robustly as we can, and as Mark said, even this morning, we're looking to see what we do within the next week to try and firm up a further bid to the Northern Ireland office for additional support in the additional security fund space. But I have to be honest, I remain concerned that we're weeks away from the budget being set, and we have no more confidence than when we were here last month about the consequences for policing. We have made some decisions through work the panel has done to see about accelerating the intake of recruits into the first 3 months of the new financial year to make sure there are officers at least in the pipeline, because if we're still restricted in our budget by the midsummer, we can still live within our means. But it is a growing concern that recent events, but the context of which we're operating, means that policing and the mission we're asking to do is expanding. And we do need the resource to do it adequately, because even as we say in my introduction, we're flexing between the enormous effort that Mark and colleagues have done to respond to this awful attack, but still turning up every day to when you pick the phone up and you respond in an emergency setting or you want your crime investigating. So all the support we can have, both from the board and politically, to get this issue resolved before we end up in a complete crisis is welcome.
Okay, thanks. Trevor?
Thank you, Chair. Like others, I don't think, I didn't know John personally, but I feel as if I've had now since the events of last week, and the thoughts of him and his wife and family is with me daily, and I don't know the individual, but I think it's just how stark and how it's touched people right across the province. Touching on the security situation and the dependence of the public and the support of the public. We've heard of some of the incidents even in Strabane. We've heard about Londonderry previously in terms of the efforts that went to these people, if you could call them that, in terms of what they've tried to do. But there's other events that we are hearing. I heard of an event this week from both people who live in the north end of Northern Ireland right down to the southern end of Northern Ireland, talking about an attack in Lurgan. And there's a suggestion that there may have been something used in terms of a rocket-propelled grenade. Is that true? And if it is true, why is that not in the public domain? Also, outside Cookstown before Christmas, a large weapon on a tripod. Again, if the police have seized that, why is that not in the public domain? Or is it true? Because if members of the public are aware of this, who are ex-serving officers, clearly their colleagues are speaking to them. But it's concerning for me if it is true that those are two serious things that's happened in Northern Ireland, and if it's true, I'm shocked if the police haven't made comment on it.
Well, again, Trevor, firstly, I think it's easy to characterise the impression that John's commitment to his work and being a member of the community has done, because certainly, apart from what I've seen firsthand, the breadth of support and messages that echo your comments, a character that wasn't just invested in policing and doing his job really well, but also in the community, which I think is particularly important here. In terms of the two incidents you mentioned, I think if I'm relying on memory, there was, if you like, an alert the other day in the Lurgan area, but that amounted to nothing. And similarly, the Cookstown issue, I've got no personal knowledge of it. I don't know if Mark wants to say anything else.
Well, I think just to add to that, if there is, when we do have an attack or an incident of this nature, we assess it, we ensure that we've got the details right or as accurate as we can be, and then we're public about our assessment. So I understand the concerns that the members sort of raising, but wherever we make that assessment, we will be public and transparent about that. It does, does us no favours not to be, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Simon, I take the opportunity to say that I and my party stand in solidarity with John Caldwell, with his family, and with every single colleague of his in the police service of Northern Ireland. The people I do not stand in solidarity with are the UVF thugs who apparently have threatened to wreck the place if they don't get what they want. So I would appreciate it if you would assure us that you have the capacity to deal with that threat, and also your assessment of whether that threat is more than empty words.
Yeah, well, again, I know from various conversations I've had with yourself and with Doug, we appreciate that wholesome support and sentiment, Michael. So thanks for that. Yes, we do have the resource at the moment if we go to a different place in terms of protest or God forbid, disorder. But as I said at the introduction, at the moment, Mike, we aren't picking up any sort of chatter or anything in terms of planning that would cause us concern in terms to a reaction in the way that's been reported that we're going to burn the place down, that's been in the media from that part of the community. But clearly, through the work that Mark does on the other bit of his day job, we are actively monitoring as best we can sentiment alongside what Bobby does with the neighbourhood policing teams. But suffice to say, at the moment, things remain calm.
Thanks, Mike. Kate, stop and search question.
I would like to note my solidarity with and gratitude to police officers who are continuing to serve our public so well in light of recent attacks. But my question was around the 16,000 people who have been stopped and searched during the 12 months between the 1st of January 22 and the 31st of December 22 under the Misuse of Drugs Act. 11% were children aged under 17, and less than, well, it was actually 0.3% of those children stopped were subsequently arrested. This can be a very time-intensive process and an unnecessarily invasive one, given the very low rate of arrest subsequent to the stop and search. What is the scale of success in seizing drugs from small-scale street operations versus, for example, the interception of and disruption to supply chains? Please.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I think you unpick a couple of really important issues here, because on one side, the question touches into stop search as effectively a crime prevention and disruption tactic. And then there's the other side of the more organised work that we will do through Mark's staff largely to try and prevent the importation of drugs or the supply of drugs at scale across the country. So I suppose in one sense, yes, the arrest rate is low for young people who are stopped, but actually we can probably provide a written answer better than time would allow a description today. That, for example, other young people would still be dealt by community resolution notice, so that there is a presumption around necessity in terms of arrest for a young person. Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do there is prevent harm and not necessarily criminalise young people. So there's different things at play in that interaction. And I think we've briefed before the work that Chris Todd is doing now to understand the effective use of powers and keep the board briefed on that. But clearly, the other work is about supply. And how we frustrate organised criminal gangs here and that also work across borders. So I don't know what Mark wants to say about the efforts we're doing in terms of seizures, which actually are reaching record levels, but there are still drugs on our streets.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. Yeah, I mean, we are seizing more now than we ever have. We have a real focus, as we've briefed many times at the board and performance committee, around the scale and nature of those, working very closely with partners in PCTF and with the NCA. But this is not something we will police our way out of. This is something that requires a health and education approach to, and we're keen to be a part of that. But even in terms of poly drug use, which we've discussed here as well, a lot of that is locally sourced. It's people selling prescription drugs that they have come into possession of locally. So it's a very complex area, and one that we need to work with partners on. So that's really our position at this point.
Well, yeah. Michael, question around crime recording.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Chief Constable, more specific question, just reflecting again, it's welcome to see the additional performance-related information that's coming through in the monthly report. And I do note reference to reported increases in crime generally for the most recent 12-month period, and the increase in the latest month-to-month comparison for January 22 to January 23. I know there's a number of wrinkles around this in terms of actual crime versus recording of crime. The question really is that I do understand that the recording of crimes linked to the categories of malicious communications and harassment have been introduced into the figures in recent years. And I wanted to ask how these categories play into the reported increase, and noting that crimes may be perpetrated online or perhaps in some cases have links to the work that the NCA does, how the PSNI is adjusting its service model to address them. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Marcus, I'll leave the work we're doing on crime recording at the moment, so I'll bring him in to explain the detail. But very quickly, I don't think this really is an NCA issue, because as you've explained in a minute, I think also the harassment question has led to a surge in the violence category, and it's a thing that's been replicated across the country because of the complexity of the recording rules that Mark will touch on in a minute. I think the thing is also, it's a shame that, you know, for all these awful events of the recent week that we're here, but the report will actually show that we now have the lowest crime levels in the UK. So when the latest validated figures have come out, we reference that in the report, so that although crime has gone up, it's gone up proportionally less than it has in other parts of the UK. And a big reason for that increase is changing recording practice for issues like harassment and malicious communication. But Mark can give some sense of what we're doing in crime recording.
Yeah, so there is quite a bit here, Michael, and we could probably talk about it at length. But so before malicious communications were introduced, harassment offences were 9%, and then after malicious communications, they represent 29%. So there's a massive issue here around how we were capturing certain types of behaviour and certain types of reports from victims of crime, particularly victims of domestic incidents and domestic crime, where a lot of these reports tend to lie. And also we identified that there was an underreporting of crime in this area. So we have officers maybe attending a domestic incident, recording the primary crime, which may well be assault or a sexual offence or both, but not necessarily recording that there also then has been maybe a period of harassment connected to it, or maybe some malicious communications connected to it as well. And that's just one example of where this occurs. Now, the overall harassment, we have pushed quite hard on the recording of harassment and malicious comms, I beg your pardon, over the last couple of years, and it does connect to, it did connect to quite a significant rise in the overall offences that were being recorded. So, but that has started to taper off. So, with overall harassment offences now on a general downward trend. So, on a general piece, maybe for the last 24 months, we've been working extremely hard on both the undercount for crime recording and the proper classification of crime recording, supported by then deep dives into crime recording through Performance Board. This is an area of deep inspection that can be carried out by the HMIC FRS, and they're coming to do a deep inspection of our crime recording this autumn on current schedules. We've been working through their associates, who are a group of people who come to help you prepare, which was done 2 years ago. And we have a work stream now working specifically on the accuracy of a recording. There is a balance here between the kind of the bureaucracy of the recording and the functionality of what it achieves. We were just talking this morning about how difficult it is to continually digitally move forward whenever we're trying to use a very binary system to kind of record some of the crimes. The main thing for the public, though, to be reassured of is that particularly in areas of vulnerability, we are now far more effective in recording every area of criminality that may have that may have occurred to a member of the public and not just going with the primary offence, which is the main progress that we've made in terms of our accuracy of recording. So we'll probably speak to one of the committees about this, you know, in the coming months, or certainly later in the year. And then certainly by this time next year, we would expect to have an assessment from HMIC FRS as to our accuracy, our timeliness, and the efficiency of our systems.
Okay, thanks. Linda.
Thank you, and thank you to Chief Constable for the report. Just want to add my remarks to what has already been said, that our thoughts and prayers are with John and his family and his young son. Just in relation to, and I've raised this before, so it'll be no shock, I'm sure, around the immigration status of victims. And I would like to see going forward, I think there was a research report done by the Assembly, and I'm just wondering, have the PSNI had sight of that research report? Have they considered it, and what they plan to do going forward? Because first and foremost, when somebody is a victim, they are a victim. Any questions around their status should not be relevant. They should be treated as a victim, and we are going to have serious issues, and we know we're already having serious issues around people from certain communities reporting crime because of that fear, and even perceived fear. So can I get some guarantees that the PSNI are looking at this, that there will be some type of policy going forward, and we will have an understanding of how that will be dealt with for victims?
Yeah, thank you. Again, thanks for those thoughts. And I do understand how difficult and nuanced this is. In fact, a few months ago, Pamela and I had a really moving morning when we met some of the women that have been trafficked into Belfast, and their experience was candidly horrendous. So we understand that what sits behind this. I'm going to bring Bobby in just to give you an update. It's probably a bit like the crime recording question. Some of the detail that sits behind it is complicated. So if we can't get enough across this morning, we can provide a written answer about all of the things that are going on. But do you want to come in there, Bobby?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Thanks, Chief. And we have had a number of questions from the various board committees on this. What I would say, first of all, Linda, is the issue of the relationship and data sharing between the police and the Home Office is an issue that has raised concern, not just here in Northern Ireland, but it's a national issue for policing as well. And in fact, was the subject back in 2018 of a super complaint. And that led to an investigation by HMIC FRS, the College of Policing, and the Independent Office of Police Complaints. That investigation found that victims of crime with insecure and uncertain immigration status were fearful that if they reported crime to police, their information would be shared with the Home Office. I have to say as well that this is something that we've heard very loudly ourselves from the Black and minority ethnic community in Northern Ireland, and we recognise that this is an issue for them. HMIC FRS's investigation found that there was no evidence of an intention within the police service to operate a culture whereby the police service was prioritising immigration enforcement over the investigation of crime and the safeguarding of victims and witnesses. But I think you're right, there does remain this perception of this particular culture. And again, we have heard not only from the community, but also from their advocacy groups, which has led us it's led them, I should say, to call for a clear firewall effectively between the police and immigration enforcement. There are some challenges for us within that, our current legal advice, and in particular our requirement to ensure that the victims of, in particular, modern slavery and human trafficking get the support that they need, means that it isn't in fact possible for us to have that firewall, and in fact it wouldn't be in the interest of victims either. In terms of our current policy on this, in line with the National Police Chief Council's guidance, the assurance that I can give you as a board today and the victims and witnesses with insecure immigration status is that we will always, when people come forward and report crime to us, treat them as a victim or witness first, and we will always investigate the allegation which they've reported and put in place reasonable measures that are necessary in order to protect them from harm. That's our policy. It was most recently communicated to our officers back in July of 2021. We will be re-emphasising that to them. And that policy effectively means also that officers should not, and we've been very clear on this, not routinely search police databases for the purposes of establishing immigration status of a victim or witness, or routinely seek proof of their entitlement to reside within the UK. I haven't myself seen the research report from the Assembly. That's something that I need to see. This is a developing area of public policy, as I've said, not just for us, but nationally. We do expect further developments from the Home Office in this area in the coming months. principally around their immigration enforcement's migrant victims protocol. It'll be important for us to monitor those developments, and we are committed to carrying out a further Section 75 screening of our process and policy in this particular area. And I'm happy to come back and update the board on this in greater detail when that information becomes available. And as the Chief said, we can provide a more detailed response which covers the totality of our relationship with the Home Office in this space.
Thank you.
As a supplementary, I think, is that right? Are you okay, Linda?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you, Edgar, and thanks, Bobby, for that, and thank you for recently meeting with John and I and Kate Nichol over this issue over the past few days. And you just raised something that I'm asking a supplementary on, is the Home Office guidance. And obviously there are different complications and difficult issues when it comes to devolved issues and non-devolved issues. And immigration is an example of that. So we know we have the Home Office guidance that will be updated in the next few months, but we also know that there's guidance from the National Police Chiefs Council, and that's very much given out in the context of the English-based system, where there are different mechanisms and ultimately different accountability structures too. So my question really is around what assurances that you can give that the accountability here with the board, and how that sits with guidance issued by the Home Office when there are those different layers, because ultimately for us, we want to seek to protect the victims of crime. And given in the past media perspective of the Home Office at leadership level can be quite concerning. It's how we can actually assure victims of crime, particularly with insecure status, on our role.
So that is probably quite challenging to try and address today, just in this session. What I would say is, I think, given that we have written questions from both, I think, Partnership and the Resources Committee as well, I'm quite happy in terms of those written responses and further evidence before those two committees to try and do that in detail and in depth. I think when you look at this issue, you know, it is multi-layered, complex, but the assurance that I can, again, and I would take this opportunity, I welcome having been asked the question, just to reassure victims and witnesses who may have insecure status, again, that we will always treat them as victims and witnesses first. And the circumstances in which we would be making referrals would be primarily about making sure that they get access to the support that they need in terms of regularising their status.
Thank you. And then I might just ask that in future, you state about the firewall, there cannot be an absolute firewall, is the idea of a firewall unless consent. And I think that's something that can be communicated much more easily, especially to those groups and to the advocates as well.
Thanks, Nuala. And then we move on to Kate again on the Overdose Prevention Centre, which the City Councillor considered.
Thank you. Chief Constable, in light of the discussion last night in Belfast City Council on how an overdose prevention centre will alleviate drug deaths in Northern Ireland if a legal dispensation was made from the Misuse of Drugs Act, what support is there from the police to support the case for that special dispensation?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I mean, I saw briefly some of the news this morning about that, and obviously only recently Bobby and I met with the Chief Executive of the City Council to discuss a range of issues in what broadly could be seen the community safety space. So, and clearly, not just here, but we've reported a number of times about our concern about the number of drug deaths we see every week. But a lot of the answer to this lies beyond policing. Mark touched upon it before in his previous answer, I think. I think we welcome a refresh of the National Drug Strategy. This should be, in our view, something that is health-led, so that it should be health service that is calling for changes to legislation. We are bound currently by the Misuse of Drugs Act, and certainly something like this, we're not ready to sort of turn a policy blind eye without the comfort of legislative change. So we're keen to be part of the dialogue and see if there's a solution that actually saves lives, because at the heart of this it is a lot of tragedy. You know, probably from some other work we've stepped into the space of prevention through the administration of naloxone, which has been, I think every time that happens, you're potentially saving a life. I think the latest figures show we've done that 18 times since the scheme was introduced into Belfast. But I think locally, through the PCSP in Belfast and also Bobby's work, I think that's where we see the route to a solution. But we do need other sort of departments to come forward with proposals that we can then advise on.
Okay, thanks, good. And finally, the last question I have here is from John. Please pay.
Chair, thank you. And firstly, can I associate myself and the Alliance Party with the good wishes you sent to John Caldwell and his family at the start of this meeting, following a week when one bunch of terrorists tried to murder that police officer in front of a group of children, including his own son, and another bunch of terrorists were threatening to burn Northern Ireland and wreck the place. Then I think we have to say today that the police can be assured of our support as they try to challenge, catch and convict these callous thugs. Turning to another issue, Chair, in relation to the job of policing and how it's rewarded, I've asked questions before about the police pay, and I know some progress has been made. So today, can I have an update on the pay situation, the settlements that have been awarded, those that are outstanding, and how the picture is going forward?
Yeah, thanks, John. And again, to echo our appreciation for those comments and your support. The police pay issue for this year has now been resolved. So it is hit pay, or will hit pay. No, it has hit pay. Track of my dates. So the award is a graduated award, but it's addressed issues as the basic pay increments and the start pay for probationary officers. So in that sense, that is good news and job done. We had only 2 weeks ago a visit from the Pay Remuneration Board, which is the national board that set pay levels. I think they were really concerned with my view. We haven't seen any written report, but certainly the reaction from the members of the board, whether they were here, I think they're quite aghast, frankly, at the conditions at which we're being asked to operate at the moment and the lack of comfort around our budgetary position. Now, I can't gainsay what that will mean in terms of either commentary or recommendations, but we are asking our officers to do incredible things, and amongst everything else, I think there's an issue about them feeling valued enough that they are reflected in the amount of pay and reward that they get. It's usually not the primary motivation for joining the police service, but like anybody else at the moment, they have to cope with cost of living and live within their means. And I think it's a real shame how long it's taken this year to get the pay award through the various mechanisms, when in England and Wales, who aren't seeing the same threat, it happens in a matter of weeks. And it is a puzzle why it takes so long. Clearly, there are extant matters for police staff. Ballot is closing from NIPSA today. So we are preparing for the potential of industrial action in a few weeks for them. They also have matters left where we've only recently resubmitted our case for an uplift in their environmental allowance, which has been a concern for the police staff cohort for some considerable time. So that remains something to do. And then obviously we'll wait and see what recommendations fall out of any new proposals from the remuneration body once their report is finished. But I know it's something that Pamela's been, and her team have been heavily engaged on and moving mountains to make sure that the bureaucracy we've been asked to feed to get a pay award approved that's already been approved has been done as quickly as we can.
Okay. Chair, I'm grateful for that, and I think it's in the interest of the police team, of course, and also the public that we could be given assurance today, and I'm sure the Chief Constable and Pamela can do this, that we will be updated regularly as this progresses, yeah.
Very much. Chief Constable, that's the end of our questions. So before I close, can I join you in placing on record our appreciation to Carol McKinney and Michael Atkinson, who will leave the board at the end of March. As this is their last official board meeting, our thanks to each of you and our appreciation from everyone. This is also our last meeting in public here in our offices at Waterside Tower. After 22 years we've been here, and we're locating on the 27th of March new premises within James House in the gasworks site. So one of the implications of that is that we will need to find a new venue for our meeting in April. So Chief Constable, thanks to you and your team for taking the questions, and to all those joining us here and online. As our next meeting says on the Thursday, the 6th of April, we will give the details about that later. And so that concludes our public session. Thank you.